Hi, my name is Mr. Barth, and this is the recording for Chapter 1, Colliding Worlds. This is going to be a short lecture video from the chapter. We go through this chapter kind of quickly because APUSH, the national exam, usually doesn't put this question or this chapter very much on their test. So we kind of use this as a good chapter for foundational knowledge and for learning more about how we get material, what the class is going to look like, and for student reflection over what you do when you take notes. So we're going to see things like this first slide. We'll have a document, a primary source. We're going to see other slides that are going to be more content filled, and we're going to talk about what the best way to take notes is during this class. So we'll get started right away. This first slide is a primary source, so it's a document made during the time period. This is from the 1500s, and the document shows a city. The city is Tenochtitlan, which is present-day Mexico City, and this is the center of the Aztec Empire. You can see all the houses and buildings in the middle, this dense population center surrounded by a lake, with these different bridges going off to these smaller town centers further away. And through this one document, I can tell that the person who made the document thinks the most important thing is the urban area. But I can also get things like these bridges to the smaller cities. That tells me that there could be some trade going back and forth. And this could mean a high civilizations through the different aspects of what creates an empire. And so we'll talk about that, and we'll see more of the themes that are in this one document as the PowerPoint goes on. So here's chapter 1, Colliding Worlds. So as we're taking the notes on this PowerPoint, you should have either a paper notebook out. You can take notes on your Chromebook. Some students will take notes through your study guide. That's fine too. However you do it, make sure you have everything prepared. What I really like about having these PowerPoints in a video format like this is that you can pause, rewind, rewatch something if you'd like, or even pause and go on to Google and look up something on your own if you feel like it. So if you have any questions throughout this video, make sure you email your teacher when you have a chance. So here's our essential question for this chapter. How did different native societies adapt to and transform the environment? The important thing to do when you're taking notes in AP is to think about the essential question. And really that's true for any course, but especially for this course. There's so much content that comes with the chapters and with the lecture. It's important to try to figure out what is most important. When we get to our first slide, we'll see that there's a lot of great information in there, but maybe not everything has to be written down. And so a key part of this class is interpreting what is the most important information. In this case, we need to know, how did native societies adapt to and transform the environment? Okay, so we should always have that in the back of our mind. If you haven't yet, please make sure you write that down somewhere in your notes, maybe really big at the top of your page or something like that. So I'm going to have that question in the back of my mind when I'm reading these notes. And the first thing I want to do when I see a slide like this is pause. Many times when students are in class and they're taking notes, they try to write down every single thing that's on the slide. And just FYI, this slide has information on it, but slides later on in the year are going to have a lot more information. And so we need to be strategic in what we write down, because there's just not going to be enough time to learn all the material. So we need to know what's most important. Doesn't mean the other material isn't useful or isn't helpful. It is foundational, and it can help us understand the material more. But there's some things that we need to know that's going to help us best for the exam. So in this case, this slide is talking about how different Native people came to the Americas. In this case, it's discussing how people crossed over a land bridge across Siberia into Alaska and then down into the Americas. In most cases, they're going to be following migratory herds of game. And so one thing that you could write down that answers the essential question is that that Native people, in many cases early on, are migratory. They follow herds of game. They follow the food sources. In this case, it led them to the Americas, which would eventually be cut off when the land bridge here in the Bering Sea would be cut off by the Bering Sea. Now, what we see in Southern and Central America is that Native people will create empires. I'll make my picture smaller there. Especially groups like the Aztecs and the Incas will develop dense population centers, productive agriculture, organized political structures, long distance trade networks that are going to create civilization systems. The Mayans built impressive pyramids. Aztecs built this one in the picture here called Chichen Itza. And so when we look at the Americas, it's not a situation where the continents are just empty and waiting for Europeans to come. There's a lot going on here in the Americas that are developing civilizations that eventually Europeans would not appreciate. Now, compared to South and Central America, North America is very different. In North America, where present-day United States is, we don't have any large-scale nation-states or civilizations. Instead, we have a lot of various communities, maybe some cases confederacies, so those are like groups of Native Americans who come together and work together. But we don't see giant pyramids and urban centers in terms of thousands and thousands of people in North America like we did in Southern and Central America. Now, one thing we do see that shows how Native Americans adapt to the culture, so back to our central question, is expansive trade networks. So even though we have smaller communities in North America, they are trading with each other in very long distances. So even in North America, we had materials from the Aztecs down in Central Mexico that was making it all the way up to North America. There is resources from the coast going all the way inland to the Great Plains. And so this all carries valuable goods back and forth, which helps these communities develop and grow. And because of how important the natural world and Earth was to the people living in North America, many of the different religious beliefs of Native people could be considered animism or naturalism, where natural world is filled with spiritual power. So that means that there is a maybe soul or spirit in animals, in the earth itself, in the sun, in different natural wonders. Now, what Native Americans are going to figure out is how to use the environment for their benefit, how to live within the environment to the fullest. And so one way that was done, which answers the essential question, is through maize cultivation. So maize is a form of corn. It's kind of like a cousin to the corn that we eat today. And one thing they would do is three sister farming. You can see that in the picture here, where you grow corn, beans, and squash all together. And then what it does is it helps each other grow. It's a symbiotic relationship where the corn takes in certain nutrients from the soil and puts out other nutrients that the squash takes in. The squash puts out other nutrients and the beans take that in, and it all develops this relationship where they each help each other to grow. And so different ways like this, natives found to be agricultural. This is especially on the Atlantic Ocean, not in the Atlantic Ocean, the coast, which allowed for food surplus, trading with other population centers. And when you have a surplus of food, it allows society to become artisans, soldiers, priests. Basically, people can do jobs where they're not just looking for food all day. So when we get to the late 1400s, early 1500s, there's probably about 4 million Native Americans living in North America. Okay, now when I'm going through this this material on the next couple of slides, we're going to be looking at different native areas throughout North America. And so on your homework that we have on Google Classroom, it's going to ask you like which area and describe them. And so these different slides are what that's talking about. So the Mississippi River Valley is one group that you should write about in that assignment. So taking these notes can actually help you in the assignment. And if you want to write your notes right in that assignment, that's perfectly fine. But you can use material from this slide, but also in your textbook to help you answer those questions. So around the Mississippi River Valley, we see some communities are using agricultural practices like the Three Sisters farming to develop larger communities. And we also see a lot of mound building around this time period, around this area. One example is here, Cahokia. Cahokia is a very large civilization, not as large as the urban centers in South and Central America, but very large for North America. And we see these large mounds that are built that you can see really easily from the sky. Here is the Great Serpent Mound in Cahokia. There's other mounds in the area, even some in Wisconsin. If you've been to Aztlan State Park, or even near UW-Madison, there's mounds all over Dane County area from natives living in this spot. Mounds could be burials. They could be a place where natives come together to for ceremonies or to make important decisions. So there's some debate on what exactly purposes were, but if you ever get a chance to go and see some of these mounds, you should definitely take it. In the Northeast, natives were hunter-gatherers, so they didn't build mounds, but because they had a plentiful forest of food and also the ocean for fishing, they didn't have to move around very much. They built permanent villages and had more complex institutions. One example of this is the Iroquois Confederacy. So this is a group of different Native Americans who come together and have some kind of agreement, or maybe an alliance, maybe is a better word, to work together, or at least not work against each other. The Great Plains is very different than the last two groups. The Great Plains does not have the forests full of deer. It doesn't have as good a farming. I mean, we think of it today as really good farming. It's very arid. And so Native Americans there, the way they got most of their food was by bison. That is the most plentiful source of food in the area. And for Native Americans who used bison for food and for equipment and for hides, you had to follow the bison wherever they went. Bison travel pretty far in their migration periods, going all the way up to Canada, all the way down to present-day Texas. Now, eventually, when Native Americans would be training with Spanish conquistadors, they would get horses, where we can see in this picture here, horses made hunting for buffalo much easier. Before this time period, it was bow and arrows, sneaking up on buffalo, in some cases finding a cliff or like a riverbed and scaring buffalo to the point where they fall off of a cliff, break their legs, and then kill them when they fall down and they're hurt. So Great Plains Native Americans are going to be moving around a lot. And this is going to be a very important theme when we get to westward expansion in the late 1800s. For the Pacific Coast, also very different from the Great Plains. In these cases, we don't have very much migration. Societies are more permanent, but they're not like the Northeast, where they're larger and have confederacies. They're very small, more independent. They don't really work together, but they do have a lot of fishing, which is enabling them to stay in one spot for a long period of time. Okay, so that's what's going on in the Americas. What's happening in the Eastern Hemisphere? I'm going to go through this very quickly. Most of this you don't have to write down unless you want to use it for background information, because that's what it is. It's background information. It's stuff that you might have learned in world history class if you took that class last year. Otherwise, it's going to help you to understand what's happening, but it's not essential. It's not an essential question for today. So in Western Europe, we see things like powerful institutions, nobility, the Catholic Church, monarchies. Remember the very powerful kings of the time period thought they were appointed by God. Now, while we have the nobility and monarchies, that's not what the situation was for most Europeans. Most Europeans are peasants and work for a lord or some other rich nobleman in the area. Eventually, they would be working for that lord, maybe becoming a merchant and artisan as technology improves. And by this time, by the time we get to the 1500s, Christianity has changed drastically. Christianity has taken hold of Europe and is split into different groups because of the Reformation. When you talk about the Reformation, you talk about Martin Luther, who is one of the main contributors to the splitting of the Catholic Church into, to make it simple, two groups, Catholicism and Protestantism. Basically, Protestant means you're not Catholic, and so Lutherans, Martin Luther is kind of birthing this very dramatic change in Europe. For West and Central Africa, West Africans have a large trade networks that they trade with Europe. As they develop more technology, they go down and are able to trade with the West Africans, especially for resources like gold. And so this West African and Central African trade network became very important. If you controlled that, you would have a lot of control in Europe. And so in some cases we would have, you can see these blue arrows in the middle here, these caravans across the Sahara Desert. But Europeans, and especially the Portuguese, would find that taking a boat down the coast of Africa would be a lot faster and you could move more supplies. And the first country who could do that and develop those trade networks would have more control over the region. And Portugal invented this type of boat. It's called the caravel, and it could better handle the very difficult sailing that was required to go down the coast of Africa. And so because Portugal was able to do that, they were able to develop important trade networks with Western Africa, which is going to become important soon. Let's skip the Crusades. So here's our central question for the rest of the chapter. How did European exploration and colonization change societies in the Americas? Now, the one of the most important people that we need to know for this chapter is Christopher Columbus. Now, it's important to know that Christopher Columbus did not prove the world was round. This is a myth from later on, where for some reason it's held on that people think Christopher Columbus proves the world was round. That's not true. What Christopher Columbus believed was that the earth was smaller than it really was. Everyone knew that the world was round. Everyone has known the world was round for the last 1,500 years at this point. What he thought was the Atlantic Ocean was much smaller than it really was. He thought he could sail across the ocean and get to India, where there's lots of spices and other resources that he wants. And everyone's saying, wait a minute, we know how big the earth is. So imagine how big the Pacific Ocean is, the Atlantic Ocean is, and that there is no the Americas. There is no Americas continent. It's just ocean. He says, I'm going to sail that way. And they're like, that is so far. There's no way you're going to get there. That's why people think he's crazy, because he didn't understand how the world worked. However, he sailed west and he ran into the Americas. Another myth is that he founded America. He did not. He never stepped foot on any land that is a part of the United States. No states was part of his mission. However, he did land on what's called Hispaniola, which is present-day Cuba. And you can see this is a primary source in this document. So I want you to pause this video, take a minute to read through the quote, and try to think of, what does Christopher Columbus think of the people that he is that he's witnessing, that he's finding. So pause the video. What does he think of the people? So when I read this document, hopefully what you're able to see is here in the middle, it says that the natives don't have any weapons. They're not fit for them. He tries to say, I'm going to go talk with them. But as soon as they saw our men arrive, they fled. Now, the reason why I think that's important is because he's trying to convince the Spanish government that, hey, there's people here, but they don't have any weapons. They're not even fit for weapons. They couldn't even hold them. They couldn't even fire them. They're well made and they're commanding stature, so they're strong, but they're very timid. They're very afraid of us. So maybe we could use their strength. We could use them, but they're not really anyone we have to worry about. They're afraid of us. Because when we go there, above it, there's magnificent rivers, there's gold, there's spices, there's other metals. And he's trying to convince the king and other government officials to come back to the Americas, that this is a really good place to spend our money, because it's going to be a profit for European governments. Okay, so now that's kind of some background. Remember, our essential question for this part of the PowerPoint is, how does this exploration affect Native American communities? Well, when Hernan Cortez, a Spanish conquistador, comes into Central America, he brings an army of over 600 men. He heard that there were natives who had gold there, and so he marched to the Aztec capital of Tenochtitlan, the city whose map we saw at the beginning of the video. Over 300,000 people lived there. So more people lived there than live in Madison, Wisconsin today. Now, one major effect of this exploration contact is that smallpox came with the conquistadors, because these two groups of people have been out of contact with each other for thousands and thousands of years. They have different diseases. They have different immuno systems. I'm not a science teacher, so I'm not very good at that. But and so what it leads to is Native Americans being very susceptible to the diseases that Europeans have, like smallpox. This spreads throughout Central America, and other explorers that would come would find that the empires that once had thousands and thousands of people are now very weakened after diseases wiped out thousands. So probably the most important thing to know here is that exploration led to population drops from around 20 million to about 3 million. It's very hard to guess how many people there were, but there are some estimates that are saying 10, 20, 30 million people were killed in the Americas just by disease alone. You can see in this map are all the different empires that would eventually be destroyed by disease. The green, the Aztec, the blue, the Mayan, the Incas down in red. And the conquistadors that came were not looking to befriend the natives. They were coming to take advantage of the resources that were there. And so in this document, we show we have conquistadors who are doing some very terrible things to Native American people. When I have students look at this, I want them to see the different pictures of people getting their hands chopped off. This guy lost his hand. Same with this lady down here. She lost both hands. This guy's about to lose one. There's people being thrown off this cliff over here. This person over here is getting their eyes gouged out. And one thing that's one question I ask for students is, who do you think made this document? I'll give you a second to think about it. You can pause if you'd like, and you can look it up if you'd like. But the document is actually going to be made by a European who's trying to make other Europeans feel sympathy or feel bad for the natives. They're trying to point out, like a whistleblower, hey, look at what's happening to natives because of what our government is doing. But others would say, well, the native people we're dealing with here are they call them savages. They looked at some of the practices and rituals of the different civilizations and exaggerated them, showed the worst part of them, and tried to show that they were not worthy of being treated civilly. And so here in this the drawing, we have a ceremony where Native people are sacrificing each other. In this case, this person is getting their heart ripped out of their body. Okay, and that's where we're going to end for the video for today. That's chapter 1. We'll be talking about chapter 2 more about this exploration, how it affects Native American societies, and how that colliding world is going to have dramatic effects on where the continent will go from here. So if you have any questions, make sure you ask your teacher. But that's it for now. Thanks, everybody.